Thanks everyone for attending today's session. I'm Steve Gunderson, VP of Sales here at TDS.
And I'm Craig McFarland, the co-founder and CTO of TDS. Today we'll share with you the methodology that we've developed to orchestrate the complexity of cloud and data center migrations. Our approach strengthens each of the phases or links of a migration process, really enabling an integrated tool chain to take advantage of your existing tools, but with a much more efficient execution process.
Thanks, Greg. You know, after working here for 15 years, I've heard our migration consultants refer to migration projects as a chain link process. And it makes sense. Each phase in the project is linked, and it's naturally dependent on the work that was completed earlier in the process. So it probably goes without saying that the first link in that chain is the discovery and validation phase. And it's at this time in a project where our teams will go in and identify and capture all the data that's impactful to the migration. And then they work to validate the accuracy of that information so that everyone has confidence that they're making decisions with good data. And then they will work to fill in any gaps in the data that was provided or supplied, and also mitigate any conflicts that may come up in terms of the data sets that are provided. Now, Craig, I think you've seen firsthand the importance of these steps in the discovery and validation process. Can you give us some color on that?
Sure. Pretty much in every project. You know, some projects typically will have too much data to start with, or not enough data. But whatever the actual case, we recommend that identifying which data points are essential for people and teams to make decisions in this project, and which might be needed later on in the execution phase. And so just that piece alone of identifying those data points that are essential and which aren't, you can cut out 80%, massive amount of data that you would waste a lot of time scrubbing and cleaning that doesn't actually impact anything. So just there, you can save a lot of time and energy. Then I'd say, since most of this data hasn't been all put together in one place before, you definitely want to have a quick review by whatever team is appropriate for that data point. And we recommend, again, having that in a central place that's open, that's collaborative, so everyone that is involved in the project can see it, and you know, the more eyes, the better, and that they'll all gain a lot more confidence once they can see the whole picture.
It's interesting, Craig, that you use the term confidence, because that's really fundamental to every phase. But you know, I can tell you that our teams specifically talk about the importance of having confidence in the data and having it validated so that they can move on to the next step in the process, which is the migration strategy. And you know, after our teams have finished all the validation, they then look at the interdependencies within the environment and look to develop a position then, or they are in a position then to develop their migration strategies. And I think in that whole process, it begins with getting a clear understanding of the current state, and then identifying the resources that are available to the project. That's very important, as well as recognizing those constraints that might impose limits on the project. But after the teams have done all that, they then can start the work of developing the future state designs and also defining migration methods that are specific to those designs that they've just created. Craig, you probably could share some of the cohesive migration strategies and how those have been impactful to some of our projects.
Sure. So, you know, one of the things, as you were saying, obviously it's critical to understand the types of strategies or which specific ones, because some will have technical limits, such as, you know, bandwidth, or you may have limits from a resource perspective of how many people know this specific tool. But then there's other limits, like if you can sync things ahead of time or not. If you can't sync ahead of time, you're going to have to sync during the cutover event, which is going to make those events a lot longer and have potential outage windows if they need to occur much longer, and will also limit how many simultaneous host migrations you can do. So being able to understand all those different strategies and options ahead of time, it sounds obvious, but if you actually put pen to paper or use whiteboards to really understand your constraints, it'll save you a lot of time going down the rest of the project.
And Craig, I know our customers have told us that they really appreciate the work that's done during the strategy phase when it comes time to start doing the analysis and planning, because it's developed some guiding policies to help frame that planning, and that the work that you do during the analysis and planning phase is much more tactical. It's here where the teams will create migration groups or move bundles or whatever the terms are that you use, and also develop the scripts and the test plans that you're going to need for that migration. And then it's also very important to develop very detailed migration run books. And a lot of the work in doing that is more than just the technical steps. It's also the balancing of the trade-offs and optimizing the efforts of the whole team. And Craig, I know you've talked for years about what are some of the most common trade-offs that companies will deal with. I think that's a good thing to highlight here.
Sure. Yeah. I'd probably characterize that most things fall into about a dozen different trade-off issues, from things like, as I was mentioning with the strategies, outage window acceptability. So you can only have things down for so long for business impacting applications. But you also may need to take into account whether you impact all business units evenly and spread out the impact over the course of the schedule, or you want to focus just so that the finance team is only impacted in one or two events. So there's kind of a balancing act you need to do there, but obviously as well, resource constraints of how many different admins or technical team members you're going to need for any given event. If someone only is going to be needed for half an hour in an event, maybe it's better to shift that to a different event so they're not wasting a lot of time sitting around just to do that half hour worth of activity. And so balancing those trade-offs as well as a number of others, it's a lot of times it's really tempting to do lots of little tiny events because it's not going to impact a whole lot. But what we've seen, and we've done a lot of A/B testing and measurement, that actually makes the overall effort of everyone involved a lot bigger. It's not necessarily obvious, but what happens is there's a lot of peripheral people that you may need to escalate to or ask questions of, and all those little interactions add up to be a lot more when you have a fewer number tiny little events. And so if you can balance it by having just the right size event, and we've got some stats on that, but if you can balance it, everybody will be a lot happier. And then, the other thing I'd say, as you're doing this analysis and planning work, the smallest group, whether you call it a bundle or affinity group or whatever, the smallest amount you can get in a group, the better, because that allows you to, those are the building blocks to your overall schedule and allows you to then mix and match. So if you have a limit to how many business critical applications are in one event, well, you have a small number of groups, you can shift those around. And so you only have one with a critical application in it in each given event. It makes it a lot easier to plan out your whole schedule, keeping into account all the different priorities we just talked about.
Craig, with the thing I've also heard from the consultants is that as the customers have worked through these different phases and they put the time and effort into building these move groups or migration groups, they start to they're ready. They're psychologically ready to move on. And I know that once they've completed the run books, they're they want to start next week to do the first move event. And, you know, that's very common that you get that kind of enthusiasm to see some progress, because that's when you really start to see the execution come into play. And it's here in the execution phase where our teams will do extensive amounts of tabletop exercises. In fact, we do at least one and sometimes two for every single migration event, so that the teams can get some real firsthand experience of what's going to happen tomorrow night type of thing. And then they also will run a pilot test migration. That's not uncommon. People always talk about
Sure.
moving some lower priority systems so that the team can get their rhythm, they can gain some experience and confidence. And then the thing that I know our teams do that customers appreciate is they follow every single event with the lessons learned. They take the log of all of the activities that were completed in that move event, and they look at how long each task took, and et cetera, so that they can fine-tune planning and execution of the next events as well. And I think, Craig, you probably could share a long list of these insights that we've gained, but you know, can you share just a couple of things that we've typically learned from a lessons learned event?
Yeah, you know, the some of them just are not obvious. I didn't realize how much time and energy was wasted having people sit around handing off between tasks. And when we developed our tool to handle that automatically, I was stunned at how much time overall was saved. So being really cognizant of the critical path between is important. And you know, when you're making a detailed run book or detailed cutover plan, everyone that you talk to that has activities in there is going to estimate their level of effort with a certain amount of padding. And so one person might add 15 minutes, another person might double or triple it just in case. And it's not until you go through that rehearsal and look at the timeline and then actually do it, especially in the pilot, when you measure it and you say, oh, you know, that was predicted to be a 2-hour activity. It took 15 minutes. And this other one, this transfer that we thought was going to be done in 20 minutes, took 2 hours because there was other network activity going on at the same time or whatever it may be. So being able to benchmark those so that you can see how accurate it is, you know, will allow you to predict the outage windows if there is one, or other activities. You don't want people sitting around all day waiting for their few tasks. If you can give them a much more accurate time period that, yeah, we're going to need you around 4 o'clock, they're going to be a lot happier and the project is going to go a lot smoother. So,
you know, Craig, we're on the hook for talking about and identifying the weakest link. And I think one of the things that everyone remembers the phrase, the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And I also know that people inherently understand that strengthening the stronger links will do nothing to really strengthen the overall chain. It's intuitive to think that way. And I know we've covered the 4 standard links or phases in a data center or cloud migration projects. And those links have, from our perspective, those links have been hardened after many years of managing projects and going through a process improvement review of those activities, et cetera. So I think it's on us now to start looking at where is the weakest link. What does our team think is the weakest link in the chain? And in looking at that, I think the weakest link has crept in with the introduction of new technologies. Companies use a variety of tools throughout the project. Some of those are some newer technologies. For virtual migrations, there's a range of automated transport tools like VMware's HCX. Now, these tools are very helpful with the overall migration. But the biggest weakness that our teams have uncovered is not in the tools themselves, but it's in the manual processes that are required for the team to do before they can initiate any automated migration with that tool, whether it's HCX or any of the other automated transport tools. And, you know, don't get me wrong, I mean, these transport tools are teams absolutely love working with them because they are a fantastic option, especially for large projects. But they all require about 25, maybe 30 manual data entry kind of tasks or steps before each virtual machine can be moved. And if you're moving hundreds or thousands of virtual machines, then you're talking about a lot of manual steps. And it's those manual steps that are the weakest link. Craig, I think you probably would be the best person to share how we've overcome that with this new advent of these tools, how we have addressed this weakest link that we found.
Sure. As you'd imagine, if you're migrating, 10 servers or, 500 servers, if they're all identical at the start and at the finish, they're all going to be identical. It's a pretty straightforward process. But what happens in the real world, unfortunately, is that there's just a lot of exceptions where certain systems are changing IP, but others aren't. Some need some tool or widget updated and others don't. So there's quite a variety of small things that creep in, especially as you get into larger numbers. And all of those minute changes you've got to do by hand or keep track of by hand. A lot of times people are doing that in spreadsheets and then copying and pasting. But, as we all know, keeping track of it in a spreadsheet, now you have to keep track of which version are we copying out of? Did I get the latest? And you all of a sudden introduce a lot of errors. And so what we found is integrating to the APIs and just passing all that data off as appropriate makes a huge difference in just avoiding any of that labor. And I was actually stunned at how much time just doing that, much like the other time-saving areas, it's lost in a lot of these little things. But being able to group things together and say, all right, all of these 30 servers are changing IPs and these others are not, unless it's in this, just sort of sift and filter the servers that need changes to their blueprint, makes a huge difference and avoids a lot of errors. And so we can end up having really large migration events where we queue things up for HCX or other transport tools to do the work that they do, and without having to be slowed down by a lot of human manual work, either before or after.
Yeah. So Craig, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to relate. We can't share the name of the client, but we have a large financial institution that we were brought in because the bank was unable to really meet their schedule, because even when they were using a transport tool. So I think if you could provide some of the metrics or color behind that one experience, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. So the I think it's pretty much the same story in a lot of places where, whether it's this bank or others, when you go from things, it's like using HCX, you can do things 10 times faster, but if you can't get out of first gear because you have to do all of these manual steps before it gets to HCX, you're going to just stay in first gear. So it's pretty significant, the amount of time saved. I think it was an order of magnitude 10 times faster from a migration perspective. The number of errors almost disappeared, and the migration team effort actually was about 45. I think we dropped it by 45% from the original estimate. So pretty significant impact, both in duration, level of effort, and reduction in errors and problems. There was that particular project was a lot of fun to see just accelerate, because everyone had a pretty low expectation in the beginning, and to see it accelerate and take advantage of transport tools like HCX was just a lot of fun to watch.
And I know the consultants really, they like to go in and make a difference, and the client had the experience of not involving TransitionManager and that full automation, and to be able to have the customer come back to them and share just what a difference it made. It sped the project, it got it back on track, et cetera. So those are the kinds of stories that we love to hear come back from the customer. I look at this as, eliminating thousands of manual steps is a win in anybody's book, or executing 10 times faster and reducing risk. That to me is the best approach to maximizing the investments you've made, not only in the discovery and the planning and all the work you've done, but also maximizing the investments you've made in HCX or whatever virtual transport tool you have. I feel like our realization that was a weak link, and then the work that your team did, Craig, to automate those manual steps really has helped us strengthen what we think is the weakest link in a typical data center migration.